The sentencing hearing for President-elect Trump's criminal hush money case is expected to begin in just moments. Let's go now to NBC News correspondent Yasmin Vasugian, live from outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Yasmin, set the scene for us.
Yeah, Mika, I'm taking a look at my Google Doc now as we're kind of getting set to hear this hearing this morning and the sentencing of President-elect Donald Trump, who's set to take the White House in just 10 days from now as a felon after the sentencing is in fact wrapped today. And what I'm hearing from inside the courtroom as of now is Emil Bove for the defense is already seated along with the prosecution. DA Alvin Bragg is in the courtroom as well. We also know Todd Blanche and President-elect Donald Trump are seated together via live stream from Mar-a-Lago. Judge Juan Merchan has also taken the bench as of 9:34 this morning. Let's talk through a little bit, Amika, how we got here, right? There was 2 delays to this sentencing, originally set for July and then delayed again after then candidate Trump was elected, President-elect Donald Trump, come November. So here we are now, January 10th, and we understand where Merchan is going to land this thing, as Danny talked about earlier before the break, in which he will call for an unconditional discharge, essentially meaning no penalty there. But in fact, Donald Trump will walk out today as a felon and be inaugurated, go through his inauguration and become the next president of the United States as a felon, entering the White House in just 10 days from now. We'll likely hear from the prosecution first, followed by the defense, possibly hearing from the president-elect himself from Mar-a-Lago, and then following that, we'll hear from Judge Juan Merchan, in which he'll be issuing his sentencing. But of course, this is the culmination after a months-long trial in the spring, which we covered 24/7, along with a years-long story of the hush money trial involving adult film star Stormy Daniels. Mika.
All right, Yasmin, stay with us as the sentencing is carried out. Just a little procedural thing here. One of the reasons she's there is she's going to be taking in all the texts from reporters and producers we have inside the courthouse. There's no audio, no video being provided, so the reporters are able to disseminate the information. Yasmin will get it to us as soon as possible. Let's bring in former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC contributor Chuck Rosenberg, former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Aronberg, and MSNBC legal analyst Charles Coleman. Great group to have. Chuck, I'll start with you. What are you watching for as this plays out today?
Well, we know a good bit about what might happen. Judge Merchan, Mika, has already told us that he is inclined to an unconditional discharge, meaning a sentence of no sentence. That's unusual and highly unusual. In all my years as a federal prosecutor, I've never seen anything like it. Almost always there's a term of incarceration or at least supervised release, probation, community service, a fine, restitution. Something attaches to the conviction. And here Judge Merchan has said there will be no sentence. But what that means, too, and this is important, is that the underlying criminal case is over. The judgment is final. Mr. Trump, of course, has the right to appeal to a higher court in New York State, but the sentencing proceeding puts an end to the underlying case. It makes Mr. Trump a felon before he assumes office for the second time. I am looking to see whether or not he has anything to say. Many defendants do, some don't. I don't imagine that he will be apologetic.
But felon almost in name only, Chuck. Are there any tangible consequences? Because when and if we do hear from Donald Trump, he's going to say this is political persecution, right. It's a witch hunt. He's not going to take ownership of it.
Right, so are there any practical consequences, Stephanie?
For the layman like me?
No.
So he wins?
Well, he's still convicted, and perhaps you draw some sustenance from that. I do. A jury of his peers found him guilty by proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and unanimously so. That means something to me. But does he serve time? Does he have to pay a fine? It doesn't seem like that will be the case.
So, Charles, walk us through what we will expect to hear about today. We, of course, won't see it with our own eyes. We're grateful that we'll have some reporters there in the building. And your expectations from what we will hear from the judge and potentially Donald Trump.
Well, John, what I first expect for the prosecutors to do is to make an application before the court for a different type of sentence. They're going to lay out the severity of the crime, the significance, and ask the judge to consider a different sentence, knowing that the judge is not going to do that. But to preserve the record and to preserve any sort of issues that might be appealable or their position on an appealable issue, they are absolutely going to make that application before the court. The judge is going to actually say, more likely than not, that he has considered a variety of different options in terms of what he could do around sentencing Donald Trump and ultimately go along with what he has already previously decided, which is this unconditional discharge. He is going to do a lot on the record about explaining the severity of the crime and the uniqueness of the situation as to try to justify it. But to go back to Steph's point, at the end of the day, this is going to be nothing. This is going to be someone who walks out of the court, and to the naked eye, the layperson will not be able to distinguish Donald Trump from a free man who is not convicted. And so you're talking about a convicted felon versus a free man, and no virtual difference between how the justice system has treated them at the end of the day. And I think that that is a true travesty that hasn't been talked about enough.
So, Dave Aronberg, let's get your thoughts on this. On one hand, yes, he will be labeled a convicted felon. That the history books will record that. And we know the judge wants to go through with this to validate the jury's findings, the process, the legal system. Look, it played out to its conclusion. So that would be one side of it. The other, what Charles just said, the punishment is basically meaningless. What do you think?
Jonathan, Trump cares about his place in history. He will become the first ever president who is a convicted felon. He cares about that. And that's why he's going to appeal the underlying conviction all the way to the Supreme Court. And to get to your and Stephanie's point that there is no other ramification for it, well, in Palm Beach County, he will not be able to vote. He'll be a convicted felon. Now, I do think that Governor DeSantis will make a special case out of him to make sure he gets his voting rights back. But once the sentence is imposed, then the question is, can he vote? Again, he will be treated differently than everyone else, but for a time, that will be in question. Now, what's most interesting about this hearing is that Trump is being treated like every other criminal defendant, which is that you have to appeal after sentencing. Trump said, no, I want to go to the Supreme Court before sentencing. And the Supreme Court justice said no. At least 5 of them did. And credit Judge Merchan for this. He was smart and savvy. The reason why Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett sided with the liberals in the 5-4 decision was because Judge Merchan took the punishment off the table. So they said this sentencing will not have any real impact upon Trump's transition. So let it go forward, and Trump can just appeal this case afterwards like everyone else.
So, Yasmin, let's go back to you there outside the courthouse. What's the very latest as to what's going on inside?
Things are happening pretty quickly, Jonathan, and I'm looking down, obviously, to kind of read this document as it's happening in real time. And just a couple of things that have taken place. So first and foremost, they discussed the pre-sentencing report, which essentially lays out the president-elect's history, his criminal history. For instance, the only objection that Todd Blanche, the defense attorney, had to this pre-sentencing report, and that, as he put it, quote-unquote, circumstances have changed. What I imagine he means by that is he is now president-elect 10 days away from taking the White House. We have just heard from Joshua Steinglass, who is a member of the prosecuting attorney's team, in which he said, quote, and I'm quoting here, the people recommend a sentence of unconditional release. So that is where we stand at this point. That is something that we expected, obviously, when Judge Juan Merchan issued that we would be going to the sentencing date today. He said it would be this unconditional release likely. And now we're hearing from the people, in fact, saying, and I quote once again, the people recommend a sentence of unconditional release. Jonathan.
So